Okay. Nazril, you should pick up your microphone, otherwise it does a metallic sound. And if you want, welcome everyone to the second Café con Paulo Freire podcast, and we are here at the Center for Environment and Development Studies at Uppsala University in Uppsala, Sweden. And my name is Daniel Mossberg, and I work with education, outreach, and other fun things here at CEMUS. And with me today, as always, I have Azril Bakal.
Yes, well, we're engaged with the program Café with Paulo Freire in CEMUS since 19 September 2021, celebrating Paulo Freire's 100th anniversary, and we continue. Actually, we have had more podcasts this year, more than two.
Yeah. We did one interview that's not released yet this autumn, and then we had 4 or 5 sessions last spring. The kind of starting point for all of this is the pedagogics and the inspiration from Paulo Freire, but then usually it's not coming back to Paulo Freire all the time in the pod, but we try to have a kind of practical focus, see if we can do that today. But it's not, we're not so strict on our guests or on ourselves.
Yes.
Good. So with us today we have Nathan Shachar, and you work as a journalist at the daily Swedish newspaper, Dagens Nyheter, Daily News, but you're also a author of several books. And you have lived and worked all over the world, but we usually give the guests here a chance to introduce themselves and maybe also focusing on the question, basically, what in life led you to become a journalist, and also what in life led you to become a writer and passionate about writing, I'm guessing, but also you have lived all over the world and have this international engagement. So you can do a short answer or you can do this longer version if you want to. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. I did not intend to become a journalist. I finished school in Sweden in 1971 and I went to Jerusalem and I began my studies, enjoyed them very much, studied philosophy with some great teachers, most of them Americans, Ernest Nagel, Carl Hempel, great teachers. I also studied Arabic and Spanish history. The Hebrew University of Jerusalem had a very lively and very large humanistic department at that time, with students from all over the world and teachers from all over the world. So this was hugely stimulating. But I realized after a few years that I was not suitable material for an academic career. So I looked around for other opportunities, and I started to send short letters and short news reports from Jerusalem to minor Swedish newspapers. Sweden at that time had unlike now, almost every major provincial town in Sweden had its own newspaper, and they were usually doing well. And many of them had high ambitions, and they wanted, did not shy away from difficult subjects. So I began corresponding with a few of them, mostly with Västmanlands Läns Tidning in Västerås. And slowly I got more and more work from more and more Swedish media, and in 1980 I began as a freelancer for the large morning daily Dagens Nyheter. I stayed there for about 5 years, and I went to Buenos Aires and I wrote for Svenska Dagbladet from Buenos Aires. I went back to Jerusalem, and then again I went to South America to write first from Costa Rica and then from Buenos Aires again for Dagens Nyheter. I also have a huge interest in Spanish affairs and Turkish affairs, but those are my fields, and I am even if you made me sound like a great cosmopolitan, there are huge parts of the world that I am unfamiliar with. I don't know much about Asia. I know very little about Africa. So, yes, I've been around, but most of the time in the same places.
Okay.
Well, and maybe we should also say that we should start with the Middle East. I mean, that's where you're reporting from. There might be a certain fatigue talking about the Middle East, but we should start there at least.
Yeah. Why not an update?
Yeah, an update, but also connecting to the issues, and maybe also because you do your reporting, like you said, in the Dagens Nyheter, and there's all sorts of news reporting from the Middle East, but maybe also focusing on a couple of forgotten issues or things you feel like is not highlighted enough by news media. Did you want to come in also with a question connecting to that?
Yeah. How do you address your task, your challenge as a journalist, a communicator, when my reading of the context is that people don't read much newspapers or books, where people are trapped into digital traps, an overflow of information that normally they cannot digest. So how do you deal with this challenge to reach? Not laziness, but this new kind of fast food tempo of making sense or accepting nonsense as a narrative.
Well, this is a huge challenge for our societies and our politics and our generation. I did not start this, so I don't feel a special obligation, to do something about it. I'm sad about it, but what can a news reporter do? He can report news, and then he can hope that some people read it. And at least at the moment, the foreign news at Dagens Nyheter newspaper is consumed by quite a lot of people, and so it could be worse. And I get many letters from readers, and I have a feeling that there is still, in spite of all, there is a lively interest in the affairs of the world, and not only Swedish affairs, but the affairs of other peoples and other continents. So one has to keep one's focus on one's work and not all the time agonize about the bigger picture. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, and maybe, and maybe then, if you feel like it's a good way to start this, could we then maybe start on where you were on October 7th last year, whether you were in Sweden or Israel or somewhere else, and kind of your framing of what happened and your perspective on it,
and summing up to present time, to the current situation.
Well, I was in Jerusalem. It was a holiday, and it was the Sabbath, and there was no reason to get up early. Suddenly there was air raid sirens, which is unusual but not extraordinary, so I kept on sleeping. Usually when the alarm goes and rockets are sent from Gaza, people in Jerusalem don't worry too much because the Hamas movement, the Islamist Hamas movement, doesn't want to launch rockets at Jerusalem for fear of harming Arabs and for fear of harming Muslim holy sites. So I kept on sleeping, but then others in my family said after a little while that you better wake up because this is unusual. And it seems that armed units of Hamas have entered Israel, in some places quite deep into Israel, like 10, 20, even 30 kilometers. I did not believe that, but I got up. And then, well, you know most of what happened later. The most important thing that happened was that nothing happened, that the Israeli army, which is a regional superpower, did not react in time. And many of those settlements and villages, which were conquered by Hamas, hundreds of people were killed and taken hostage long before the Israeli army reached there. So this was a strategic fiasco because those who should have known did not know about this. Millions and billions are spent in order to find out, what are the plans of the enemy. And they lost this. And then when the enemy attacked, there were not enough troops to defend the country. So this was if you remember that Israel is a country, it's I won't say militaristic, but it's a martial kind of country where the military and defense and intelligence is central. Those are the things that the state budget spends most of its resources on, and then we failed so dismally. This trauma of having failed so terribly, it's part of the ongoing story, because one of the reasons the Israeli leadership and the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, especially, one of the reasons they're not in a hurry to end the war is that they don't want to be held accountable for this huge failure. In all Israeli wars, after every Israeli major war, there are commissions of inquiry, and everything is looked into, and recommendations are issued. Important people have to resign, and usually their political careers or military careers end there. And this is what is going to happen to Netanyahu when all this ends. So if you wonder why Israeli troops are still fighting in Gaza, even though Hamas in Gaza has been defeated, it hasn't been eradicated, because you cannot remove each single armed person in Gaza. But Hamas has lost the war in Gaza, but Israel keeps fighting. That is not because of any military realities, but because Benjamin Netanyahu wants to postpone as long as he can any reckoning.
Yeah, and I think, do you want to come in, Israel, first, or should I?
Yeah. And in addition to the strategic mishap are the corruption charges that led him to try to dismantle the countervailing power of the equivalent to the Supreme Court in the world. So the different reasons, both military, strategic, but also in terms of democracy and the autonomy of the judiciary to be able to hold the parliament and the executive accountable.
Yes, this is an important aspect of all this. And, all of last year before the Hamas attack was a huge civil battle between the two Israeli camps, the democracy camp and the government camp. As you say, a series of reforms were initiated in January of 2023, when and part of this was, if not to dismantle the Supreme Court, to remove its most important functions and authority, so that to create a system more or less like the Turkish system, where you win the election and winner takes all, and then you have the judiciary and the courts, and you have everything. And this was not originally Netanyahu's program, but as you say, he became entangled in various very severe accusations of corruption, and his advisors told him that his only chance of surviving these court, he's already charged with in 3 different cases, and these processes are going on, and they've been going on now for 2-3 years, and if he's found guilty, he will go to jail. So in order to save himself from that, he must dismantle the judicial system as we know it, and put his own people in charge of the Supreme Court and of other important institutions. So these things hang together.
Seems to be a pattern, like in Hungary, it was in Poland, in the United States with Trump and the Supreme Court. So there's a kind of parallel development in different parts of the world.
And also, because if we can kind of merge away, not merge away, but kind of build on that as well. Because I think also what became from October 7th, but maybe also before then, became really strange from my perspective, is how you would make a critique of Benjamin Netanyahu a synonymous kind of project of being critical against Israel, or merging it into kind of an anti-Semitic project. In the same way also, you can be very much against civilians being killed in Gaza, but you don't have to be pro-Hamas, or you can be against Lebanese people being killed in Lebanon, but you don't have to be pro-Hezbollah. So why do you think, and this is a difficult question, but why do you think all of these things came by kind of merged together following October 7th last year?
Well, the Israeli right-wing government had no idea that Hamas was going to attack Israel. It had no idea, that it would be caught with their pants down, and that so many Israelis would be killed, and that public opinion would change. Public opinion in the old days usually would be wary of entering Gaza. Public opinion did not want to sacrifice Israeli soldiers in order to hurt Hamas. And Netanyahu has been very, very careful in his career, entering Gaza and starting any kind of military adventure, because he knew that the Israeli public opinion is so sensitive to loss of lives on our side, less sensitive to loss of life on the other side. And now these two things continue in parallel. The war against Hamas, and before the war, Netanyahu worried about being sent to jail for corruption. But now he worries about having to assume responsibility for the greatest military fiasco in the history of the country. And that frightens him even more. So he's playing for time. And at the moment, of course, he hopes that his friend Donald Trump will win the US election and somehow make it easier on him. I'm not sure he's justified in putting his hopes on Trump, because we can talk about that later.
That's a good line. It is assumed that Trump will support Netanyahu all the way, but maybe jump a little bit to Lebanon, Hezbollah, and then Iran. How do you foresee the retaliation to Iran's last military attack on Israel, being that Iran has been using the proxies? There's a terrible joke about Iran fighting until the last Arab, because basically they are Arabs, Shia Arabs, that are doing the killing and the dying. So what will be your line on that?
Well, for many years, the Iranian government spent its best resources on its proxies in other countries. And that's part of the reason why the Iranian regime is so unpopular in its own country, that Iranians know that their low standard of living is a direct result of the huge investments made in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, Yemen, Iraq. Thousands of missiles made and bought and sent abroad. And this was it was an Iranian colonial project. Of course, rhetorically it was about freeing Palestine, but it was an Iranian influence project. And instead of conquering these different countries, Iran chose a local minority or a local party and supported it, usually a Shia movement. Palestinians have no Shiites, so they picked Hamas. And Israel was afraid of Hezbollah. Just a few months before the war started, Hezbollah put up tents next to the Israeli border in a provocative move, just to see how Israel would react. And the Israeli military wanted to attack and remove those Hezbollah tents from the border. But Netanyahu said no. There's no point in overreacting, because he knew, and we all knew, that Hezbollah had 150,000 missiles, some of them guided missiles pointed at vital Israeli installations, electricity, ports, military bases, hospitals. And it is possible, if Hezbollah would have started the war the way Hamas started the war, if Hezbollah had done what Hamas asked Hezbollah to do, to join in on the 7th of October, if they would have done it, they might have put Israel in a really tough, even, desperate situation. As it were, Hezbollah decided on the 8th of October, a day after Hamas's attack, to start shooting a moderate kind of fire against Israeli settlements in the north. And Hezbollah has done that for a year, and most of the population along the border has left, which is another huge problem for Netanyahu. But Hezbollah made the mistake of not using its immense power when it could still surprise Israel. In the end, Netanyahu was forced to act against Hezbollah in a big way because he was losing popular support because of all these refugees, Israeli refugees, moving south and leaving the border empty. That cost him. His image is always Mr. Security, and I'm the only politician who can save you against our enemies. So this was too much for his image. All these 70, 80,000 Israelis who lived in hotels or who were, with relatives all over the country. So now the Iranian project, lots and lots of Iranian money is now being destroyed during the ongoing Israeli attack on Hezbollah, and the Lebanese allies. Hezbollah says, why don't you help us? We're allies. Why don't you come to our rescue? Our capacity is being eliminated by the Israelis, but the Iranians are not in a hurry to do that. They wanted these proxies to fight for Iran. They did not want to fight for them against Israel.
And what is then your reading of the confrontation that would be more clearly, explicitly Israel vis-a-vis Iran?
Yeah, I forgot your original question. This is complicated because on the one hand, Israel could cause Iran great harm, by knocking out its oil business and its gas business and the ports from where they export oil to China. Israel would like to, I'm not sure Israel is able to, but Israel would like to harm Iran's nuclear program. But as you know, the Americans have insisted that Israel refrain from such drastic measures, and that Israel instead, concentrate on regime symbols and the basis of the Republican Guard, or maybe military industries in Iran, or maybe knocking out their anti-aircraft systems, their Russian anti-aircraft systems. I don't know what will happen because, again, Netanyahu is not in a hurry to end this war. So the Americans now say to the Israelis, okay, do something, but not big enough for the other side to have to reply and escalate.
Is that because the United States wants to avoid being involucrated in the regional war with Iran?
Well, the Americans have huge forces in the region. They've sent even more forces. They have 2 aircraft carriers and lots of other ships, and they have in the past few days they have sent extra anti-aircraft, anti-missile defense systems to Israel. So they want the Iranians to know the Americans want the Iranians to know that they're there to support Israel if America has to. But America also has discreet contacts with the Iranians, trying to convince the Iranians to not to overreact. And it seems that the Iranians are very worried because the Iranians don't have the number of missiles that Hezbollah has. They might have 3, 4, 5,000 medium range missiles that they can send to Israel, but they have no modern air force, and they cannot send soldiers against Israel. So, and Israel has precision weapons, as we saw, as we've seen many times, can hit things like very, very exact hits inside Iran. And the Iranians are, of course, very upset that their regional colonial project is in trouble, but they are also all the time aware of their precarious situation at home, how their own slim support they have from their own people.
Nathan, jumping from war to a day after, when the war stops, do you foresee a chance, a possibility of an eventual peace, reconciliation between, let's say, Israeli Jews and Palestinians in a way that people can inhabit in the same territory along democratic, secular, multicultural conditions, like coexistence, the way, let's say, in Northern Ireland, the IRA and the Ulster Protestants, or the way French and the Germans, and the way that South Africa managed the post-apartheid with this Truth and Reconciliation Commission with Desmond Tutu. How do you see, if you want to read, you're not a prophet, we are not prophets, but how would be your reading?
Yeah, and maybe I can add just a small thing as well, that it would make a huge difference for the region if the Iranian regime would be gone. A democratic or something else than we have now in Iran would make a huge difference as well.
Yes, I agree. That would help. Unfortunately, the present Israeli government is not interested in the kind of utopia that Azriel was describing. There is a part of the Palestinian people and a part of Palestinian politics which is open to reconciliation and a peace agreement. The Palestinian government in Ramallah is still committed to the Oslo Accords, which was the peace agreement between Israel and the PLO, which was then the representative of the Palestinians. And about, I would say, at least half the Israeli public would gladly accept a peace. They would accept a two-state solution if they believed in it. Some of those who would accept it, they don't believe in it. And that's another psychological problem. But at the moment, those who reject such a peace are winning Israeli elections. So I think, unfortunately, the only way that the region can move towards a kind of settlement would be huge pressure from abroad. not pressure from Israel's enemies, but pressure from Israel's friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, should we have, I think 15 more minutes. So maybe we should try to link the Middle East to the rest of the world, but also let you, Nathan, if there are specific things happening in the world in other continents
that you want to share with us.
That you want to share. And because the link from the Middle East, I mean, everything is interlinked in a sense, but with the Russians backing Iranians and the Iranians supporting the Russians, and now also the discussion around North Korean troops in Europe. So the North Koreans supporting the Russians and the Russians supporting the North Koreans. So all of these conflicts are interlinked, and there's spillovers on all continents and consequences. But are there other things, because I also highlighted that at the beginning here, around issues or news that you feel is not brought up enough in the Swedish news media or in general?
I would like to put Erdogan in the picture too.
Yeah. Well, I'm extremely worried about, the axis of evil, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and others, spending so many resources and so much energy on not on themselves and on resolving their own problems, but on really sabotage against the free world. But I'm no expert on any of those things, so I am worried, and I'm worried that Donald Trump might willingly or unwillingly help these people, these saboteurs, in their mission, because I think the only way to hold back and to defend the free world is to be resolute, and to more or less what we have. It took us some time, but what we've learned since the Russian attack on the Ukraine. I think another big potential problem is that in many Western countries, the threats against democracy now does not come from some violent fringe groups or from military juntas, but from the politicians themselves. The politicians, like I mentioned about Netanyahu wanting to change the landscape of democracy to suit himself. The same thing is going on now in Spain, with the Spanish Prime Minister trying to change the system in order to make permanent his own rule. For example, in Spain, the chief prosecutor has always been a non-political post, and lately the government has chosen one of their own for that post, and also now for the post of the head of the state bank. So we've seen this in Poland and in Hungary, and Trump has a long list of independent institutions that he wants to turn into government agencies, and this is a danger, especially since our politicians in most countries now are politicians for life. So surviving for them is crucial. In the old days, most politicians were people who'd made a name for themselves or a career in other fields, and then being trusted by certain groups, they tried politics. But now most of our politicians have been politicians in school. Right. A famous columnist in Dagens Nyheter, Anders Isaksson, he wrote a book called den politiska adeln, the political nobility, those, and what he meant was that really the leaders of the parties and the professional politicians really feel closer to each other, even though they pretend to fight each other in the parliament, then they feel close to their voters. And this is a danger that I see.
We should wrap up, but we should maybe also, because you have read Nathan's book, From Strindberg till Cervantes. So from Strindberg, a Swedish author, to Cervantes. I don't know if you have a question on that, or we should just mention it. But
I was thoroughly impressed by your depth. And not only Spain, Portugal, as you wrote, small country, but this small country created a new global order from Magallanes, Elcano, and Portuguese colonialism in Brazil, and Angola, and the literature. So, and I felt I was upgrading my Swedish reading. The first time I read you was Spain, the Godfulla Passion, the Spanish passion that has to do with your personal history.
Thank you.
Thank you. I discovered.
If anyone's interested, I might mention that I have written 2 books in English. One about the Gaza Strip, its history and politics, and another book about the Mediterranean island of Rhodes. And it's about the minorities of that small island. The book is called Greeks, Italians, Jews, and Turks Between Tradition and Modernity. So the other books that you mentioned can only be read by Swedes or...
And by weird Swedes like me.
Well, you're already a Swede.
Nathan, if I know how much time do you have, Daniel, something about your view on Latin America, where, following the news in Peru, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, quite close. And it's, in the case of Peru, it feels like a dark, bitter night, because you have a criminal band controlling Congress, Parliament, military, police, most of the judiciary, not completely, and the big media. So that was one of my questions, and one about the influence that Opus Dei has, even in the States, in the next elections, given the vote to Trump because of the abortion and the gay question, but also having a kind of paramilitary presence, not just in Spain, throughout Latin America, with Vox, that is not longer bounded by Spain, but it is throughout Latin America very active, including the States, as I mentioned, in this coming election.
Well, I think that the misery of Latin America, I'm sure it is exploited by extremists, but I think it goes deeper than that. The chronic failure to create independent institutions, it makes life easier for all kinds of extremists and parasites. For example, the way that, as long as I can remember, Latin American businessmen and entrepreneurs have always been more interested in having good relations with the government than to invent and discover and change things and making cheaper products. They want and still want good contacts with the government, for the governments to keep tariffs high, to keep out, competing goods. Exactly. And, a measure of protectionism is sometimes necessary in all kinds of countries, in all kinds of situations. But in Latin America, it's been, and you've seen it in Peru, you've seen it in Chile, in Argentina. When you change the system a little and just let people work, there is growth, there is innovation. But then this small-time politics and often extreme ideological movements,
What about corruption? Corruption is a big structural issue.
Yes.
And they say the public service, the public sector is corrupt, but who corrupts them is the private sector too. When Odebrecht was asked about corrupting the politicians, he said, no, they were already corrupt.
Odebrecht was a big Brazilian construction company which bribed almost everyone in Latin American politics. That's an example, but you cannot, you cannot blame the people, because you cannot exist in those countries without corruption. When I came to live in Buenos Aires, my friend taught me how to shake the hand of a person with a folded banknote hidden in my hand, passing it over to the other guy, and thanking him for taking an interest in because otherwise I would not get my driver's license on time. And hundreds of little things that are corrupt that don't need to be corrupt.
Yeah. It's systemic lubrication of the system.
Exactly.
Okay. So maybe 1 hour, or maybe the world is too big for 1 hour to actually cover everything.
Maybe final words.
Yeah, we should do some final words, and we should say thank you to Nathan, and thank you, Azriel, also for joining us here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this as always is fun. We should maybe have a disclaimer at the end and just clarify as well that we as individuals and human beings, and also in the pod, care about all civilians, their lives, and whether they live or die. But I think it's also important that you can be very critical of political parties or individuals, or whether it's terrorist organizations or whatever kind of entity. So we can kind of separate those things and keep two thoughts in our heads at the same time. And I think we will publish this episode first, and then the other one we recorded earlier in September will come after this. But thanks again, Nathan.
Any final words, Nathan?
Yeah, do you want to add something?
No, I want to thank you very much, and I got to say some of the things that are important to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathan.
All right,
Thank you.